Alright. Routers and switches. Week 7 through 8. Alright, so we reviewed VLANs and we tag the frames. So inside the encapsulation, 802.1q. And we talked about router on a stick. We talked about having, you could have a couple different VLANs out here. And here we talked about a laptop, a phone. And that traffic can then move through. If it's going to get routed, it would get routed in here. This switch here, if this switch had VLANs, it had nothing to do with the VLANs on the other side of the router. Does that make sense? So it's like these blue VLANs over here would have no effect over here on the different VLANs that you might have over here. Alright, and we talked about a couple of other protocols. Ethernet 802.3, Wi-Fi 802.11. So the transition here occurs, we just talked about, you have VLANs here, you can have VLANs over here, and then you can do sub-interfaces right here and have all of them talk to each other. And then again, these VLANs have nothing to do with these, because if they're going to talk to each other, stuff's going to get routed and the encapsulation is going to be gone. Remember, the encapsulation only happens here at the trunk, and then if you're trunking here, and the same thing here with this trunk. Now, since this is pretty common, switches and routers together for VLANs, we can have a multi-layered switch. Switch virtual interfaces. So here we can make a connection, a router connection, because we can turn a switch port into no switch port, and we can add an address. So just like a router talking to a router. Down here we can have a trunk. So our different VLANs, like VLAN 10 or whatever, can trunk through here. And then inside the multi-layer router, multi-layer switch, we can turn on IP routing, and then we can go interface VLAN 10, and we can give it an address. We could do the same thing. If you go interface VLAN, let's say 20, and go ahead and assign that an IP address. This IP address and this IP address, those would be the default gateway for the VLANs. Default gateway for all the VLANs over here. Or here, you know, in either place. So we create those switch virtual interfaces, and so we can do routing between the VLANs inside the multi-layered switch, which is a better way probably than doing it through a router. This was an example. We had a lab set up, and then we set these up for the students to work on them outside of class. So I can move on. Here we reviewed the same issues with getting inter-VLAN routing, VLANs, between VLANs. We talked again about multi-layer switch replaces this scenario right here. Now you could do this, you could have a VLAN and a VLAN, and then don't do any trunking and have two ports on the router, and this would work. And it would be pretty fast because you have separate traffic there, but it becomes impractical when you try to scale. So this was the InterVAN lab. So each group had their own set. They had to set up a trunk, had to set up InterVAN routing inside their multi-layered switch, and then these were connected to another multi-layered switch. And eventually we worked our way out to the internet so we could get a true look. So each of the groups configured it based on the different addressing here. So if you want to check back, into your labs where they did this, this would be the information. The connections here going out to that router. And then the groups had to have multiple networks inside for each of their VLANs. And they had devices here and devices on the multi-layered switch. So I reminded them you have to set up IP routing, and then you have to configure the switch virtual interface. VLAN, and give it an address. Alright. Then we started moving into more specifics on routing, and we started talking about static routes and default routes, and we reviewed that. I'm not going to spend any time on that here. Okay, dynamic routing, static routing, default route, floating route. So we really started talking about routing more specifically here right before spring break. This would be chapter, this is, I believe now would be, what I should say is week number 8. I don't remember exactly which chapter it was. Remember, a floating route, you can put 2 routes in the router. Let's say we had 2 defaults going out. You could have one of them be your main one, and then the other route would be a floating route. You could give it a different administrative distance, so if something happened to this route, this one would automatically take over. And you can create those by just adjusting the administrative distance. So we gave some examples here. This is the same thing we just talked about. I'll give a scenario. You have the West headquarters. Talking about a large company, they would have their locations out here, and then locations connecting to headquarters, and headquarters connect to another location here, who then could stem out and have different locations. We talked about that administrative distance. A connected route has a 0, which would be the best. 0. Static route 1, and then we have all kinds. EIGRP is 90, and OSPF 110, 120 for RIP, and so forth. So here's one of those examples where we probably talked about a floating static route. You might have a low bandwidth, high bandwidth. This would be in your routing table, and this would be your backup to the same network. So like I said, if this would get cut, it could immediately go to there. Now, a little review, just a second. If we look here, the value that's better is always the lowest. So if you want to think about the metrics for routing or these administrative distances, you want to think of it as cost. So the lower the cost, the better. So if you have no cost, that would be the best way to send the packets. Only 2 slides left. This is a scenario where we reviewed, where we did the lab. But anyway, we had set up a couple PCs, 3 different VLANs. PC here, we have a multi-layered switch. Connected that to another multi-layer switch, and going out. So this was the other lab that we did, and we just redrew the diagram here, and we just didn't redraw all those that were connected. These were things, made a little list of things we have going on. Inter-VLAN routing, multi-layered switching, we talk about static routes. Chapter 6 finishing up, some labs, and then do some summarization. Remember, if you're going to summarize a set of addresses, okay, it's the same, same, same. So where it's different, like right here, write those octets out, and then find where they're the same. Okay, so if you're going to write out, so up here, I'll do it again. So if you're going to write this one out, 1 in binary, okay, in binary 1 would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay, and then 2, 2, 3, 4. There's 2, and then we have some others in between here, and we went all the way down to 10. Well, how much would be 10? Okay, so we have, these are 1s, these are 2s, these are 4s, and these are 8s. So we're going to have 1, 2, 3, 4 zeros, and then a 1, right? 8, 9, 10. Alright, and then what you do is you find where they all the same. From here on, right? They're all the same. From here on. And all those in between, because this is 10. This is 10 here, so everything else, 10, 9 would be 1, 0, 0, 1, and and all the others would fit in there. So where they're all exactly the same is from here on. So if you're going to summarize that, 192, 168, those are all zeros, so it would be 0.0 slash 8, 8, so it's 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. 20. That'd be the summarization. Alright, that's it for this one.